an author, first of all. I'm a novelist, really. Don't let this nonviolent stuff fool you. I actually don't like to go confront empires unless I have to. I prefer to sit at home and write. Unfortunately, our world has quite a few social justice issues. And unfortunately, for those who would like to dominate and control others, I happen to have red hair and get fired up about taking them on and, transforming things. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about this project that I'm working on called Live, Share, Grow, a movement for the 100%. And in the course of doing that, we're going to actually talk about a few different things. One is wealth and income inequality. We'll talk a little bit about the statistics around that. We'll talk a little bit about the dynamics around what keeps that problem not just in place, but perpetuating and getting worse. And we'll also talk about some ideas around how nonviolent struggle in all of its dimensions can help to work to transform that process. This is something I've spent several years intensively working on, and Dariel's now in the room, so I can mention him. So part of my journey starts with writing The Dandelion Insurrection, which is a novel about a nonviolent movement in a slightly fictionalized United States. What happened was I had all these characters that I fell in love with, kind of characters like you that I'm falling in love with today, and I got them into a big mess, plot-wise. And I didn't know how to get them out of the mess. They had a hidden corporate dictatorship, and I didn't know what to do. So I Googled it, how to bring down dictators nonviolently, thinking maybe Ursula Le Guin has written something about this. I thought Starhawk maybe wrote something like that. Maybe I get some ideas. Well, 20 million hits later, I found out that there's this burgeoning field of nonviolent struggle that's just truly mind-blowing. And I literally got a hold of a stack of books, taller than I am, and spent a couple years going through them. Gene Sharp, Gandhi, King, George Lakey. There's this great handbook for nonviolent campaigns from War Resistance International. I totally recommend it. Several of you in this room or your spouses have written books that I've read. It was amazing. It was the most empowering thing I've ever done in my life. I went from feeling totally apathetic politically and slightly disempowered to being like, oh my goodness, we can tackle anything. It's a little bit of a heady experience when you really realize that the only thing stopping change is actually ignorance. This is very Buddhist, ignorance, lack of knowledge, disempowerment, despair, isolation, separation. And if we can change those factors like we are doing today here at FOR and in our own communities and our own lives, we can start to unleash this power of nonviolent action in all of its dimensions. So not just go out and disrupt the system, but also construct new systems and also reconcile people and also use your nonviolent communication skills and your unarmed peacekeeping and your peace teams and all of the dimensions of this thing called nonviolence, which Kazu wonderfully pointed out has no hyphen. Just drop that from your lexicon unless you're making a point. And start to understand that nonviolence is bigger than this room. So, one of the reasons I say that is because I work with Campaign Nonviolence, which tries to go into mainstream communities, or any community, it doesn't really have to be mainstream, and really bring these tools and the dimensions of nonviolence into our normal lives in plain speak, language we all talk as human beings, right? So you're sitting down with your mom, your brother, your cousin, your aunt, your uncle. You're figuring out why nonviolence matters to them, how to talk about this. Do they care about restorative justice because their son broke somebody's window? Not because it's ending the mass incarceration system. Or maybe they care about it because it's ending the mass incarceration system, not because their son broke somebody's window, right? So understanding who you're talking with and why. What brings me to this work is this lineage. It's actually what brings us all to this work. And I always like to start my workshops now bringing up and invoking the lineage of nonviolence. Those of you who were with me in the last session have done this already. I just want to acknowledge really humbly that the first recorded act of nonviolent action was the Egyptians in 484 BC. No, 1170 BC. The first general strike was the plebeians versus the patricians of Rome in 484 AD. I could have some of these numbers wrong. Don't quote me on them. You get the idea. Egyptians, Romans. Since those times, we've been on an escalation curve of using nonviolent action, which Erica showed you this morning is going off the charts. And in every single one of those instances are hundreds and thousands and millions of people like us who experimented, who tried things out, who studied, who learned, who suffered, who persevered. Some people who died for this knowledge that we have today. In Buddhism, there's a whole thing about it's an honor and a blessing to show up in a time where you encounter the Dharma. It's an honor and a blessing and a responsibility. And I feel that way about nonviolence and nonviolent action, that it's a blessing that our lives have intersected with each other today and with this field. And it's also a responsibility. So in my life, I had this responsibility of, because I got to sit around and read a set of books this tall and write a novel, The Dandelion Insurrection. And then something else happened in my life, which is that I decided to write a book about Daryl Garner, who's sitting there in the back of the room. And Daryl Garner he used to be not this charming fellow that you see before him right now. He was, I won't ruin his whole story, come to his workshop on Sunday. But he used to be a member of the 0.01%. He's not anymore, so don't go hit him up for money. But do go hit him up to ask him his perspective about the 1%. It's very interesting. So we have lots of tea, and we sit around and we talk about who is the 1%. What is this? Why are they like? Why did they have so much money? How did Daryl and everybody else get so much money? Not everybody else. The other members of the 1%. Is it just because I'm not working hard enough that I don't have enough money? Right? And we go around and around and around. But I have a responsibility as I'm having these conversations because I know about nonviolent struggle. I can't just talk about the issues. I have to think about what to do about the issues. And then that becomes really challenging because I'm just this one little redhead. How am I going to stop the class war? How am I going to wage peace on the class war? How am I going to say to the 1%, you really don't have to do what you're doing? How am I going to say to the 99%, we really don't have to go along with impoverishing ourselves by giving them all our money? So that's, and then another thing happened. We met Chuck Collins. Right, so we all know Chuck. A lot of us know Chuck Collins. Look, there's my friend. So Chuck and Daryl have something in common, which is actually quite rare, which is that they both actually used to be quite wealthy, and they no longer are. Chuck is one of the inheritors of the Oscar Mayer fortune, along with 90 of his cousins. But the Oscar Mayer fortune is so large that that's actually a sizable 90% share of that fortune. But Chuck, when he was a young fellow, actually kind of about your age, he got this money and he noticed something really quickly. He was embarrassed to tell people about it. It was very awkward socially. It separated him. And he and Daryl recently got to talking, and Daryl started saying the same thing. When I had money, I was separated from people. I could never tell if people actually liked me or if they actually wanted my money. Right? I was very much, Daryl and Chuck would talk about what is this effective money and is it really getting the 1% of what they want? And the upshot is, no, not really. So Chuck has another role and function in life. Since he gave up all his fortune, he had to get a job. And he got a job working with income and wealth inequality in the Institute for Policy Studies and inequality.org. He's written a number of books on inequality. And so he was able to give us a whole lot of statistics that Yariel had worked really hard to find as well. Prior to Occupy, by the way, the statistics on inequality were not available, period. The very ways that we used to calculate inequality were broken up by quintiles. So bottom 20%, next 20%, next 20%, next 20%. Now we're talking the 1%. You can find the research on the 1% and the 0.01% and the 0.0001%. Right? So keep that in mind that another lineage has been investigating this. So with these two guys in the room and with me in the room, we had a little bit of a responsibility. Put our heads together and think about this issue and think about how we as people can go out and change this issue. And here's why it's so important. Every 36 seconds, by the time I finish this sentence, somebody else in America will have died of inequality, poverty and poverty-related social conditions. This is the Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health came up with this study. Every 36 seconds, someone is dying of poverty and poverty-related inequality in the arguably the richest country in the world. But it gets worse. 1 in 3 of us is going to die of this problem. And the little hidden part of this is that inequality is not colorblind. So inequality hits people of color hugely disproportionately to white people. So usually in a workshop like this, I would say, just look around. 1 out of 3 of us in this lineup is going to die of inequality. Right? You're not going to get access to the same medical treatment, health care, safety, the longevity enhancing factors like good education and therapy and whatever it is that contributes to that the wealthy get. Right? Usually I can say look around, but demographically if we look around and we're sitting in a room of white people, that's not a true statistic. Now actually EcoArch has done a pretty good job, so unfortunately the statistic might actually play out okay in this room, but think about that. Think about those dynamics a little bit. But 1 in 3 people are going to die of inequality. That makes it the leading cause of death in the United States, by the way.
That's in the U.S., not globally?
This is in the U.S. Both of these are U.S. statistics. Shocking.
British Medical Journal?
Yes, this is the Harvard researchers that were published in the British Medical Journal, the Lancet. And if you get on my mailing list and you send me an email about that, I'll send you the studies. They're readable, actually, I read them. So we know it's inequality not just because the researchers tell us, but because, we know that poverty in the U.S. is actually caused by widening inequality. It's not actually that there's just not enough money in the system. There's plenty of money in the system, and here's how we know. It's some simple math. If we shared all of the income, the productivity and the income of the nation equally, every man, woman, and child in this country would be earning $60,000 a year. I don't know about you, but I'm not making that much money. No matter how much FOR wants to pay us for being workshop presenters, which they don't pay us for this, but this is a number that most of us are not making because the 1% is making that. And it actually gets even more appalling because income is just one part of the inequality, wealth is the other part. So right now, if you took all the wealth of the nation, all the houses, all the bank accounts, all the businesses, right, all the wealth, what constitutes wealth in this country, and you divide it up equally, every family of 4 would be a millionaire. Did you catch Cosmo's look?
It's not me in Florida.
Where do we sign up?
Yeah, exactly.
I have those for you. I'm actually demonstrating that I'm strategically thinking here.
That's a family of 6.
Oh, you mean for the $1 million, not my movement. Sign up for the movement. Okay, so these numbers are shocking. They're startling, but they're also a way of understanding why this is so important to work on. And let me give you the one little pointer, maybe two, about this. So, if you put wealth in stacks of $20 bills, like, okay, we go to the little ATM machine and gives us $20 bills. So, a black person in this country would have 3 inches of $20 bills. White person in this country would have 3 feet of $20 bills, on average. Bill Gates would have 341 miles of $20 bills. 341 miles of $20 bills. Whereas your friend who is African American, average African American, has 3 inches. And even your friends who are white have just 3 feet. And there's some other statistics that I could work out for you if you're another race category that would like to know how tall your average stack is. I think that's unfair. How about you? I kind of think that if Bill Gates has 341 miles of $20 bills, that he has enough wealth to share it a little bit. He also has enough wealth to not actually charge us so much for our computers, to pay his workers more, to wage economic justice overseas where he manufactures his things, to pay for cleaning up the messes in the mines that he uses to get his metallics and his minerals.
Right.
And this is not just true for Bill Gates, this is true for all of them. So Facebook. There are 3 Facebook owners on the Forbes 400 list. Why are they asking our social justice institutions to pay for advertising on Facebook? Right? Walmart. The Walton family is the richest family in the entire world. Why are they not paying their workers a living, not just a minimum wage, a living wage, right? Now, here's the really tricky part, is that I can't just go to Bill Gates or the Waltons or Zuckerberg and say, you dirty bastard, why are you doing this? That's really not going to convince them to maybe rethink their policies. This is where you're way ahead of the game because you're Fellowship of Reconciliation. And you understand that if we want to resolve a problem, we have to treat the human being that's underneath there, right? And it doesn't just go for Bill Gates, but everybody in the Microsoft Corporation. It doesn't just go for the Waltons, it goes for everybody who's working for the Waltons, everybody who's spending their money at Walmart. If we want a different system, we, and I mean we, like the 100%, have to find ways to change and transform this system. Because one of the things Daryl found out when he was super wealthy is that actually the wealthy don't have as much power as we think. They feel kind of disempowered, which is why they try to buy elections. I guess. Yeah. So here's the thing. Yes, question.
Well, it's kind of a tangential comment that I've been pondering. You know, if we equalize this wealth and we all have more money, what people do with that money is that we buy stuff. And there's this parallel problem to the economic disparities, which is that we are not living sustainably with the resources of the planet. So we don't need more money to buy stuff. We need a different system to live.
So there's a couple dimensions in there, and I want to bring them up. Because, yes, you're right. There's an overconsumption that is part of our cultural attitude in the world, and those who can afford it are doing it. There are a lot of people, 46% of this country actually, who are not making enough money to live on in this country. 46% of the U.S. population is at or below international standards of poverty that are based on the cost of living in your world.
Did you say 46?
46. Now, doesn't the economy make sense right now? We don't have enough money to live on, because actually it's concentrated. That's the upshot. So there's two elements. Those of us who have wealth in the world, and some of us do, who are spending on what the Taoists like to call straw dogs, these things that you, like Christmas trees, right? You buy a Christmas tree and then you throw it out on the street the next day. We're over-consuming. That is resource that's not actually being given or shared or invested in this bulk of our populace who actually doesn't have enough to live on. We need to think about these things. I see, I'm going to keep trying to project so that you can hear. So if you're sitting in the front row, I'm not yelling at you. I'm just making sure that you can hear. This is a very complex Venn diagram. And what you can't read in my illegible handwriting is that this is an analysis of how our issues intersect. So inequality connects to, say, low wages and mega corporations connect to oligarchy in our political structure. That connects to, like, say, the climate crisis, which connects to our healthcare crisis, which connects to our debt, which connects to our students, which connects to poverty, racism, police brutality, gentrification, high rents. The reason you look at this is to understand the scope of the problem that you're dealing with, right? This is a strategic analysis tool, and for all of your movements, this is a take-home thing. Sit there and doodle about how your movement is connected to other movements and how your problem intersects with other problems, and get to know that field really well, because it's going to inform how you choose to move forward. For example, without knowing the effects of racism on inequality, as a white person, I might go out and I might start saying to Bill Gates, why don't you go fund local food movements in all these white communities? That's great. Without recognizing that actually where that money needs to go to make real economic justice is to predominantly people of color. Not exclusively, because there's a lot of poor white people too. But if we really want economic justice, we can't have it without racial justice. And like you just brought up, you can't have economic justice, well, it's kind of pointless to have economic justice without climate justice and sustainability. You can't make any kind of money or have any kind of life on a dead planet, right? But we're really cool, amazing, modern human beings who do systems thinking, and we can handle this. We really can. So here's the good news. That's the bad news. All the problems are connected. Here's the good news. For every problem that we have a corresponding movement, many movements, many organizations that have arisen to deal with them. That's what all these little circles are. You got public banking, credit unions, giving and sharing as a way of life, simple living, you have Black Lives Matter, universal basic income, fight for 15, just transitions, local renewable energy, divest, reinvest, social responsible business investing, slow money, slow food. I could go on until I'm out of breath. It's so exciting what people are doing out there. There's so much creativity, so many building of new systems going on, especially around alternative economies. I literally cannot, every time I make a drawing like this, I have to add more circles to it. It's so exciting. But the problem is the circles are about this big compared to a problem that is massive. So when Daryl and Chuck and I were thinking, what can we do about this problem? That was a major strategic consideration. We don't actually need to go out and build all these new systems. People are doing it. What we as nonviolent movement organizers need to do, ready? Cause defections. That's what the red line means. Go into the nexus of the problem. Go to our fellow citizens and fellow country members and our businesses and our investor class and our I was going to say divestment, that's not what I mean, but like our funds and foundations and our everyone. So we're saying we need to change this. And you know what the good news is? There's something to change too. We need to literally go up to people and say, here's the problem and here's the roadmap to get to the solution. Right? We have a problem with our old economic system, and there's all these creative things that are happening. Why don't we do this? So that's where Daryl and Chuck and I started coming up with this idea that we like to call Live, Share, Grow, a movement for the 100%. A movement that goes to people and says, we have a problem, there's some really great innovative solutions. Wouldn't you like to come on a journey and try them out? Now this seems a little crazy to think about. I'm going to go to Bill Gates and tell him that. I'm going to go to my mom and tell her that. I'm going to go up to, I don't know, you look like a very reasonable human being actually, and say,
Actually,
you know?
you just don't.
But when we think about it, that's an important part of change. We have to remove our complicity of silence, of the silence of our complicity. That right now, if we think about our world, 4th of July weekend is great. Everyone's going out, and this happens day after day after day, and without saying boo to a ghost, not making a peep about problems that we're facing, they're going about participating in them. So every day in America, 230 million people, women movements subtracts an activist, right? So maybe 220 million people, that's the highest, right, are out there continuing the system as usual, business literally as usual. So we thought, Live, Share, Grow, if we're going to make a grand strategy for how to change this equation that we're facing, we need to interrupt business as usual. We need to encourage people to withdraw support from the old systems of the justice and put support in new systems, right? That red line, this is what we're describing. Interrupt, withdraw, and participate in something new. This is also what we like to call the two hands of nonviolence. Oppose the injustice, propose a solution. Right? Be against the problem and for the person. Stop the destruction, support the life affirming. The two hands of nonviolence. Obstructive program, constructive program, to use a Gandhian term. When you start to get these two hands moving, you start to unleash unstoppable movements for change. We can do this in really strategic ways. And I hope you're taking notes. This is not just about this issue. You can think about this for every issue that you're working on. In fact, one of the ad hoc sessions is about, oh, you're doing it. With restorative justice and the school-to-prison pipeline, you did it. Been there, did that workshop.
But I can talk to anyone, right?
Yeah, and it's just amazing. And he's amazing, too. And so that's an example of constructive action within the problem of the mass incarceration system to actually intervene and interrupt in one of the layers of the cycle that's feeding the problem. Just get restorative justice in the way, in a constructive action that changes and transforms it. So this is the pillars of support analysis, and some of you have encountered this and some of you have not encountered this yet, maybe. But basically you're looking at what's holding the problem in place. What are all the things? And as you can tell, there's a lot of things that hold income inequality and inequality in general in place. Does anyone want to shout some out? You can cheat, but you can also, you know them.
Legal system?
The legal system. What else holds inequality? The tax system, right?
Education system. Social norms.
Education, social norms, good one, yes. What else? Media, right. Who wants to be a millionaire, right? The military-industrial complex.
Our thinking.
Our thinking,
Money.
Education system.
like she said, the education system, right.
Capitalism.
Capitalism, actually, yes, does very much hold this in place. What else?
Racial bias.
Racism, what'd you say?
Yes, so is the racism biases?
Yes.
Breakdown of organized labor.
Yep, right, the destruction of the unions and organized labor.
The entity and legal system of a corporation that is not human beings.
Yes. And like you said, religions, yes. There are religions that, almost all religions actually try to not support wealth and inequality if you look at the originators of them. But in how they manifest in the world, they often show up quite in support of wealth. Because a lot of them are funded. Little anecdote on that, just to segue. There's this big thing that happened in China around the Buddhists. where they used to get all their funding from the wealthy in the cities, and all of a sudden they decided we're going to move up into the hills and become self-reliant Buddhist communities, and they started preaching better Dharma to people. So you didn't have to preach Dharma of wealth to the wealthy anymore. Ask me about that later. I love that story. But what else? What else is holding the system in place?
Philanthropy.
Well, I'm going to talk more about that. So if that surprised you, don't worry. We'll talk about that. Okay, so the list actually goes on, and I'll pull out a few key highlights in a minute. But I want to point something back, reflect something back to you. You know this issue intimately. You know what's going on. Like, this is not something to leave to the experts. This is something we all know very, very well, right? And I would like to also point out something else that happened, even in the proportion of what we popped up just in brief. Did you hear how many intangible factors came up? Our beliefs, our media, what we say, what we think, how we treat the wealthy. That you can't work on income inequality inequality, period, just as an economic issue. You can't just tax away the wealth of the 1% and not expect that it's just going to go right back up. You can't actually break up their monopolies right now and expect that some other greedy person is not going to go make new ones. Because right now we actually have a cultural system that says that's okay. And it traces back philosophically to conquest and colonization, slavery and modern day incarceration, as well as older forms of incarceration. It's about, I can do whatever I want, and I don't have to be responsible to any of you. It's an attitude, and that's actually an American value right now that I feel needs to go away. That we don't have any rights without responsibility to one another. And I want to honor my co-host of my radio show, Sherry Mitchell, who's from Scott Indigenous, that's where I got that line from. Rights and responsibilities come together. So cultural means need to change, social means need to change, right? We have all these wannabe wealthy that keep the system in place because we all say, woo, look how great wealth is. We see it on the news, on the advertisement, on the billboards, on our magazines, right? We're all like following Kim Kardashian around, trying to like wear her new hairdo or whatever. We want to like emulate people who are wealthy. That's how we define success. If we want to change this, we have to redefine all of that. And that's a cultural, social, ethical, economic, and political movement. But like I said, we can handle this. We're human. In the classic pillars of support analysis, you're going to want to, this is the very basic form, you break in and weaken, erode the pillars of transformation. There's another way to understand this. Change and transform these pillars. Take all the resources of your society that are currently propping up the problem and put in systems, right? Take the human resources pillar, all the people who are shopping at Walmart, and get them to go support their local businesses, right? Take the material resources, and I don't mean you need to totally fast from Walmart. A lot of people, Walmart is where you have to get your stuff. But I mean when you get to the checkout counter, and you might be buying that barrette, or those chiclets, or, I don't know, lighter, what do you get at the checkout counters? Think about that right there. And say, it's $2. Does the Walton family need that $2? Or does that guy who's panhandling out there, because he doesn't have any money, need that $2? Who am I going to give this resource to today? How am I going to take back my power that comes in the form of the dollar bill? That's just one form of our power in this situation, and give it to someone who needs it more than the Walton family. We almost bought some Mars Corporation chocolate bars at the airport the other day. We're like, the Mars family, they're on the fourth floor of the list. We love them. We love to bring their money back into community, support everyone. But you know what? Until they do, we don't need to eat Mars bars chocolate. So some key problems, just to pull out of the pillars of support as we move forward to think about this issue. And this comes from Sometimes you really want to sit down when you do strategy and talk to lots of people like we just did, because they're all going to have a different piece of the truth, right? You know stuff about wealth inequality that I don't. Daryl knows stuff about wealth inequality that neither of us knows, right? But here's a few key ones. People have low wages, right? The Waltons are rich because their workers are poor. That's a pretty simple equation. There are wealth-sucking industries. Our utilities are structured that way. By the way, typical monopolies, all of them. The payday loans are a wealth-sucking industry. Wall Street in 2008 was a wealth-sucking industry. It tends to be that way anyway. The military-industrial complex is actually a zero-sum game. I don't know if that's the word, but it ends. You can't have a vibrant economy that's built on a system where you blow up your inventory. It's like really bad business for so many reasons. Okay, so wealth-sucking industries, you probably know a lot more than that. Concentrated wealth. So there are massive fortunes that are at the top of the 1%, and there is no mechanism for bringing that money back down. Trickle down is a lie, right? We all get that, nod your heads. Right? Trickle down does not work. There is no real taxation on the wealth. A lot of it is offshoring and disappearing from our economy forever, basically. They're stealing it, is what I would actually say. Then if we want, and again, we can't solve this problem just by raising wages. That would help. But we have this bulk of resources held by very few people. And we need to find a way to change and transform that concentrated wealth. And that's going to take some movement work. And I think that's going to take some reconciliation work. Because, nominal circle is pretty darn amazing. You could force them to give up their wealth, but I think you're going to be a lot more effective if you start out with your right foot forward and you be very convincing about why changing the economic system is going to be actually better for everybody. And Daryl's going to talk a lot about what is it that the 1% wants that they don't have right now, they can't have. That human connection with real people like us. I mean, when was the last time you ran into Bill Gates at the grocery store, really? Right? That sense of belonging, that sense of security, which is odd to say because even though we have no financial security, a lot of us have social security. Well, that's social relationship security with one another. Relationships. We got to fix the tax loopholes and the tax havens. So that the banking and finance system is ripping everybody off, and there are very specific policy shifts that they can and should make that we as movement people will pressure them to do. This is actually very straightforward movement stuff.
What is wealth defense league?
Gonna get to that.
Oh, okay.
First, cultural myths and implied consent. So we talked about that a little bit, but that implied consent is huge. Every day we're just saying it's okay by not saying anything. The Wealth Defense League. So not only do we have wealthy people, we have a whole strata of people who are like, my mission in life is to protect the idea of massive fortunes. I'm a lawyer. I'm an accountant. I'm a politician. I'm the Ayn Randian think tank. Right? I'm a media person for Forbes 400 list, for example. I'm an economist, and I talk about trickle-down effect. The Wealth Defense League is the people who use their power, their position, their skills, their knowledge, and their resources in service of maintaining wealth, massive wealth, for very few people. They're on the list because when you start a movement, it's always really good to know who's going to fight you back. And they're actually employed to fight you back. They've been doing it historically for hundreds of years. The Pinkertons would have ended up in the Wealth Defense League, among many other notorious actors. Other problems on the thing, box stores and mega corporations. Not only are they sucking the wealth out of the communities, they also are inherently undemocratic, inherently monopolistic, and they're actually taking away the jobs of your friends and neighbors who might otherwise have their own businesses in your communities. right? So just really mull on that. Charitable industrial complex. So Daryl mentioned this. So this is why you want to sit down and talk with people about strategy, because we were talking one day about this problem, and Chuck said, oh, we have to work on the charitable industrial complex. And I said, what's that? Being the resident member of the 99%. And Chuck said, oh, well, you know, those are the funds and foundations where they have millions and 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 millions of dollars in them. And they give out like $10,000 to some low-income community and then $1 million to their staff members, who happen to be their family members. Those are the charitable industrial complex is the scam with the art museums where you get a tax deduction for your private collection of Picassos that you put on display once every 10 years and write off for the rest of the other 9 years. Yeah.
Just quick, I spent 10 years working in philanthropy, and I actually worked in like small grassroots social justice philanthropy, and I think even that realm of philanthropy is hugely problematic. So it's not just the big foundations, but it's the small.
You said it.
social justice.
I'll second that, they're more cutthroat than business.
Yes.
And add to it when we
You gave 2 examples of the large examples which made sense. What are the examples of the more grassroots?
I mean, there's a lot, but like one way is just because small foundations don't have as much money to give away, we have to really hone in on funding priorities. And funding priorities creates issue silos, and that fractures movements in really problematic ways. Just quickly.
So here's a really interesting, tiny little example of that. I was speaking with a fellow who organizes in Denver with the Hispanic community. He is Hispanic. And he said, we have funding for youth programs, and that sounds like a really great thing. But the problem is we don't have funding for what we do culturally, which is intergenerational. So people are trying to do a good thing and giving us funding for our youth. But it means that our programming is all for our youth, which separates them from our elders, which isolates our elders and breaks up our family structures, which is actually inherently against our values as Hispanic, Chicano communities, right? One of the big problems with philanthropy is that it is so inherently undemocratic, right? So Bill Gates, not to pick on him all the time, we can think of a few other billionaires like Zuckerberg's daughter's foundation that just got started, who also have this problem. They're making these decisions based on their worldview and values, but unfortunately their worldviews and values are actually part of the problems that we're facing.
Yeah.
So like, you know, the vaccine thing, the funding of Monsanto, like the core curriculum, by the way, he and his wife really pushed that. They've recently drawn out of it because they're like, that bill. So when wealth concentrates, power concentrates, decision-making powers concentrate. So you can think about this all in all of your organizations and all of the work that you do. If you're going to take a resource, if you get access to a resource and somebody wants to give you a grant, talk with them about saying, let's say we have this pool of money and we bring people together for a participatory budgeting project. This is a real thing. People do it all over the world. How can our communities decide with all of their collective wisdom what they need with this money? Not what you think they need. That's patriarchy and domination. But how do we decide together? Yes.
Just one example of a field that brings together several of those. I did a lot of work on the drug industry, and here it's a parent function is helping people live longer and healthier and so forth, right? It's a very noble kind of enterprise. But of course they spend far more on lobbying Congress to get benefits and on advertising than they do on research of the drugs themselves, you know? And they do all kinds of really evil things, like they'll buy a drug from another company and that we're selling it for $10,000 a year, and jack the price up to $90 or $100 or $110,000, $120,000.
Like our notorious farmer bro.
They use those lobbyists to get Congress to pass things like, you know, Medicare. this great program, great idea, and they get Congress to prevent them from lobbying or from negotiating lower prices for the elderly.
Right.
That's not crazy.
So on the next slide, which actually we can go to now, is other considerations. When you're doing strategic planning for all of your campaigns, just make a note about this, you not only want to look at the nexus of the problem that you're facing, what's holding it in support, and at how it relates to other issues, but also what you see brewing on the horizon that could affect your issue dramatically. So we have a problem with wealth and inequality, but we also have a looming crisis around automation. Obama got up and said 80% of the jobs in the U.S. are going to be automated in, 30 years or something like that. We already don't have jobs for people, and that's killing them. Think about how my statistics about every 36 seconds somebody dies are going to change when automation hits. Climate change, always have your eye on that. Corporate power and non-democracy, and that's the point I'm getting back to. You cannot, I'm going to say this in a very strident fashion, sorry, you cannot petition your senators to solve this problem. We do not live in a democracy, we live in an oligarchy. There's a study called the Princeton study by Martin Gillens and Benjamin Page. It proves that for my entire life, from 1981 to 2001 is where their study works, we the people never ever got our way through Congress unless the 1% or the business community also seemed to align with our values. But when we needed something that they didn't want, 0.0% of the time, 1,900 policy issues, we did not get our way on that. That is not a democracy.
Again?
It's the Princeton study on oligarchy. If you Google that, it will come up. It's also by Martin Gillens and Benjamin Page. So we need nonviolent movement to deal with this. We need people power to deal with this. Our Congress people are not only are they unwilling to deal with it, they actually are not capable of dealing with that. And I hate to say this in the Bernie movement, but Bernie alone could never ever solve this problem. And Bernie knows it. He's tried to tell us he needs us to solve this problem. We need us to solve this problem. And the good news is we have tools to do it. Okay. So, my new thinking is that we can be more skillful than just breaking down pillars. So I want to turn this sideways, just so you know what I'm about to do in the next slide. I'm taking this slide and turning it sideways, because I don't draw very well. There's your power holder, right at the top. The guy used to stand on top. He's over here. There's your new systems being built, over on the left. And in the middle, you have 5 different types of nonviolent action. And pillars of support that you're intervening in the middle. I'm not calling that. There, you have protest and persuasion. A person standing in the middle of the pillar, which, this is not a secret, it's kind of my intangibles pillar, so it really works out well in my little brain. He's standing in the pillar saying, don't go support the wealth inequality. Right? I'm going to keep saying inequality because it's not about the 1%, really. Well, statistically, you're always going to have 1%. But hopefully they have a whole lot less money and we have a little bit more money than what they currently have. So that guy is saying, go that way. Go check out the new economy, the peace economy, the local economy. Go check out the giving and sharing. Go barter, trade. Go give to your neighbors. Go create housing cooperatives. We have options here. The second little guy is non-cooperating. He's not telling anybody to do anything, but he's standing there in his little pillar of support saying, my resources are not going to go to the old system. Non-cooperation, things like boycotts. Then we have people intervening in the old system, acts of intervention, blockades, sit-ins, strikes, shutdowns. They are getting in the middle of the pillars of support and saying, we are not going to allow the resources to reach the old system and continue their path of wanton destruction. We want them to go the other way. Then you have constructive program. So they're not just saying we're going to stop this problem, they're saying we're going to take the resources through constructive action and we're going to put them into the building new systems. So Gandhi's SALT campaign was a constructive program where he said, right now our SALT that we need for a way of life is currently supporting the British Empire. We're going to take that SALT, make it ourselves, and use that SALT as a way of funding the movement and the greater prosperity of the Indian people while undermining our reliance on the British, increasing our self-reliance, and defying their authority. Gandhi, look at this. This is special for you guys. I put this on here for you. Reaching out the hand of reconciliation. Because we don't just want the 1% to be throwing a tantrum while we take away their toys. We actually want them all to come and be a participant in building this new economy. They've got all the toys. Why don't they show up? We want them to come home to our human family, to our communities, to come back. They don't have to amass all this wealth because they're scared of us. We want them to come home with all that wealth and listen as we find ways to put it to work. This sounds totally implausible unless you know Chuck and Daryl. And then they'll be like, well, we did it. Yeah. Gates can do it too. And that's the cool thing is that Chuck and Daryl actually want to go out and say to all of our billionaires, we did it. Why don't you? I mean, look at Daryl. He was miserable. He was trying to kill himself as a 1%er. And now look at him. He's happy. But really, if we're building a movement, okay, let's pretend Daryl's the 1%er again. If we were building a movement and we have some options, like we said, here's our pitchfork, and we start running at Daryl with our pitchforks, what's he gonna do? Okay, that was a 1%er reaction. It was probably realistic. If we came at him and said, we're a nonviolent movement, but F the 1%, what are you gonna do?
Build a blockade.
Build a blockade.
Or defeat him. Oh, yeah.
If I came to you and I said, we think this isn't working for you. It's not working for us. We have a great project to revitalize our communities, and we think you might want to be a part of it. What might you do?
I would probably be overcome.
He is right now with them. So in his workshop on Sunday, we're actually going to explore that very concept further and role play, stand in each other's shoes and listen to hard truths and speak truth as well and see what happens, see what we can learn strategically about how to approach this issue. So with Live, Share, Grow, this movement that Daryl and I are actually launching, you're all invited, that comes later. We wanted to see how can we do this as a movement? How can we actually do each one of those things? Remember, in our little diagram with the little squiggly mark, everybody's out there building these systems. How can we use an act of non-cooperation, focus and persuasion, constructive program, intervention, and reconciliation to get that shift happening with mass numbers of people? And so we came up with a little thing which actually turned into this amazing project where we wanted to invite people first. Invite people to these cool projects that are coming on. Issue the bold invitation to Live, Share, Grow. I didn't tell you why it's called Live, Share, Grow. Do you want to know?
Yeah.
I had a movement teacher, a nonviolent movement teacher, who said to a whole group of people like us, would your mom show up at your movement? And I just about fell out of my seat. I was like, I have never considered even asking my mom to show up at my movement. Of course, Kazu's mom is sitting right there. So. And a lot of our moms and probably access kids. Well, that's a good question too.
The question is, will I show up if my daughter?
Exactly. So, there were a few things. I don't want to forget anything, so I'm actually going to look at my notes, which I try never to do. But I really started thinking about that question. My mom, you would love her if you met her. She's so bright. And she's not exactly the person you would see right away in a movement for some very valid reasons. But there are some things that might work for getting her and your mom and your brothers and sisters and neighbors and friends and relatives. One, be visionary, right? George Lakey told me just the other day, You know, here in the US, we aren't visionary. We don't give ourselves permission to be visionary. I don't know why that is, but let's do it. Let's be visionary. My mom likes visions. Your mom probably does too. 2, speak her language. I might call it intersectional justice. My mom might be like, are you talking about the stoplight down there? Right? I might say it's constructive program. And my mom would be like, construction? What? You've got to talk the language of the person you want to move. Right? Don't be attached to your language. Communicate with them, right? If you're going to go to France, speak French. Or at least laugh about how you can't speak French very well, which is what I do. 3, tell her another world is possible and it's already on the way, right? Tell her about all those new systems that are happening. Tell your friends and neighbors about them. Because we've seen this in nonviolence, people don't know it's possible because they've never heard about it. So don't just talk about the problem, talk about what is happening, what's possible, how they might enjoy it too. 4, tell your mom how to get there in practical ways. Right? Don't just say, I have been to the promised land, and then leave her. My mom loves to hike. She loves it. I can't keep up with her. If I say to her, Mom, there's a promised land over there. It's a beautiful view. You're going to love it. It's going to be great. And we are going to have such a great time on this journey together. I'm going to walk there with you. I mean, my mom's going to tear up and be like, I'm so glad we're doing this together. What a great mother-daughter bonding experience. We're human. It works for us. There's a very small percentage of the populace who's actually psychopathic. Very, very small. Most people, including the 1%, are human beings. And if you say, there's another world that's possible and I'd like to walk on this journey with you, it's going to be fairly convincing. And then 5, use those commonly held values. And that's where the name comes from. Where do we meet? What's our common ground? We all want to live. Sharing, we learned in kindergarten. And growing is actually a good thing. It's the basis of life. So commonly held values, you can use them in your own movements too. Take a note for your campaigns. These are things like respect, dignity, safety and security often, equality, fairness is actually a hugely important American value. Often very much rooted in why people are fighting is a perception of it's not fair to us. From whatever end of that. I could go on about that for a long time. I won't. What are some other commonly held values that you might know? She's wearing one on her shirt.
Yeah.
Peace, which is kind of interesting.
Parenthood.
Parenthood. Yeah. Yeah. Family. Right, the Republicans know that too.
Fairness.
Fairness, yes.
Compassion.
Compassion or
Yeah.
love.
Celebration.
Celebration.
Empowerment.
Empowerment.
Trust.
Trust, that's a great one. Right. So there's more. But the reason, remember I said you want to speak their language? If you're working on a lot of people, you want to look for commonly held values. You want to root your slogans and your messaging in that. And really look at who are you trying to move and what language are you speaking? Right? And if you're working on our friends on the right side of the spectrum, and you're trying to say, stop the military, stop the military. I've done this, so I'm taking this personally. Stop the military. It might not be as effective as saying, our safety and security is rooted in de-escalating this war. Your children are safer if we pull out of this war. Right? Safety and security is actually our commonly held value. Things like that. So that's just a few ideas about how, the last and most important thing, and I'll just behave myself right now. If you want your mom to join the movement, invite her. You are invited to Live, Share, Grow, a movement of the 1%. Literally, yeah, go invite her to join the movement too. right? I'm demonstrating to you this very basic principle that actually we don't do in the movements. I have never asked my mom to join my movement, literally. I've never asked you to join my movement. You just got invited. And so with Live, Share, Grow, we thought, let's make a bold invitation and like boldly ask 320 million people, literally, to withdraw from the old system of the economy and start practicing in the new system. And to do it in large and small ways. Take back the $2 from the Walton family that already has enough money and give it to your neighbors on the street. Go stop at that taco stand. Go stop at that potato stand on the side of the road. Support each other. Share what you have and find creative and bold, innovative ways to do it. If you look inside, our bold invitation actually talks about the 1% and the 99%. Did you get one? Oh, you're going to give me back some because I got more people to invite. Thank you. I printed a lot because I got 320 million people to get to. I'm going to work on it this weekend. I hope you help me.
What, the 30 million you can?
Yeah, I wanted to say something at this point. I really love this whole project, and I'm still thinking about, because it's actually a two-pronged thing, is I do grant prospecting and we write grants. And those are the various issues that we talk to the grantors about and how they divide, our systems. And we had to let go of several of our preschool teachers because the funding wasn't refunded. And, and our population is has the highest suicide rate, lowest, highest dropout rate, and we're off the charts. And so we've asked, why are you doing it this way? And they said, well, where they got their money, there's their requirements that they have to follow. And so, and then the way the systems are set up, they're very complicated. So just even, going for the money, or even going for even $1 million, it's multiple pages and pages and pages and pages, like a 100-page RFP or whatever. So that's one part of the issue. Then the other is often trying to appeal to those who have no interest whatsoever in who you are, what you're doing, would rather, not even have you be alive. I mean, that's part of it. And a real tangible example is during the Pride Parade. We participated, all of the indigenous nations groups got together, and we took up an entire block, a huge downtown block. There were so many of us. There's a couple of groups that were just so anti LGBTQ, and they were just, you could just see on their face, they were just so full of hate. And so we went over there and we're drumming, and I'm sending love, kind of thing. And it's like, they're like nowhere near wanting to even sit down and talk or listen. And so there's those issues that are, there's a big, strong status quo that still is very much alive and well. With the Bilderberg group and, the one world order. I mean, there's a huge system, that goes for hundreds of years.
Yeah, so this is perfect. And I see your hand, Glenn. I want to get back to you in a little bit.
No problem.
So, I'm glad you brought this up right now, actually, because the bold invitation is about reaching out despite the odds, shaking up your own expectations and saying, you know what, they're never going to move if I don't actually make that first step. If I never show up and ask them, nothing's ever going to change. This is actually very basic Gandhian philosophy, by the way. King, actually was very good about this. But we're not going into this naive, right? And that's what the next part is about. And if you'll bear with me for a second, let's go forward a little bit and come back to questions, because maybe they might get answered in the next section. So, just to briefly cover this, the bold invitation, ask them to do something. What are we going to ask them to do? 5 constructive actions. You know, support local food and localism, your local businesses. Move your money. If you have a Bank of America account, actually open one up at your good local credit union. If you have millions of dollars, move it into something else, right? This is like a very simple equation, but work on sustainability and renewable energy because of the climate crisis. We have to make sure we're doing intergenerational justice about that. Give and share. Everyone can do this. Stop thinking in isolation. Stop thinking just me. Think about how you can give and share with the people in your community. A lot of us are doing this already. That's what makes constructive action actually very powerful, is that we do it. We do it naturally. And then the last one is just participate in change. And this is because we can't have real change unless we have movement participation and democracy, and both of those are based in participation. And right now we have a culture of like backseat drivers in terms of change. So if I'm going to go out and ask people to come and live, share, grow, I also want to challenge them a little bit to get out of their comfort zone and to show up like so many of us are showing up, and to know that this is part of being human in the modern era. Right? We are not 1,000 years ago when the king makes all the decisions. If we want an ethic of democracy, we actually have to show up and do it. And it's not easy, right? Especially when we're working 3 jobs. Let's say that. So, ask them to do constructive actions. Participate in those new systems. That gives us the strength and the resilience as a community to actually have a movement that can sustain. Then a movement can go out and interrupt business as usual with all those acts of non-cooperation, intervention, protest, and persuasion. And what are you going to do when you interrupt business as usual? When you go into your corporate bank and say you need a policy change, every person that comes in, they're disempowered unless you give them something to do. So I'm going to invite them to live, share, grow. Come be a part of this. And what are they going to do when they live, share, grow? They're going to do those 5 constructive actions. When you think strategically about movement building, this is a note, you want to have primary, secondary, and tertiary targets of every action that you're doing. So even if you fail to move the bank to change its policies on that day, you succeed in getting the people coming into the bank aware of the movement and aware of what they can start doing today to make a difference. If we integrated constructive action into all of our movements, right, so if, Cuz is a bad example actually, because he does this all the time, but he's a great example because he does it all the time. But every time that some of us go out and protest the mass incarceration system, if we had a flyer for Kazu's restorative justice program, and we were handing those out on the street, he'd have more people than he knew what to deal with, right? Oftentimes we're saying, stop the problem. We might even be saying, and this is the solution, but we often are like, this is why I really wanted to bring something in my hand, we're forgetting to pass the clipboard of the sign-up sheet and to actually give people something they can take home and think about. That's what I've noticed. So we talked about constructive programs, so I'm going to jump. Now we're going to talk a little bit more deeply about the strategy question that you just brought up. How do we not go into this naively? So, remember these key problems? Those are all pillars, major pillars. And in strategic movement building, we want to think about how we can transform those pillars strategically. Which campaigns, this is a very brief strategy note, actions make up campaigns, campaigns build into the arc of a movement. With wealth, we got to work on wealth suckers, funds and foundations, big fortunes, tax reforms, but we also have to build a movement first. Not first, simultaneously, really. But you want outreach. That's what the bold invitation is about, right? Find a variation of that for your movement, too. You want to do constructive action so that people can right away start removing their consent and cooperation from the old system and putting it in the new system. Then you want to use some of your other tactics to really work on those pillars. So boycotts and divestments from the wealth-sucking industries, right? Divestments are about taking the money out of those systems of injustice and putting it, ideally, into systems of justice. Boycotts are about saying, we are not going to support you unless these 4 policies change. We got to think strategically about that. I don't want to go into too much detail because we only have so much time. Same with going up the ladder. But this diagram doesn't get at the other dimension of nonviolence, which is that we're not just strategic beings. We're not just savvy thinkers of how we can undermine pillars and get our way in the universe. We have an inclination towards reconciliation, towards healing, towards hope, towards possibility. And that's where rethinking these campaigns comes in. So this is the same setup, more or less. There's one little switch, but the same setup as you saw before. But in this, these are our ideas about how to take action, framed in the world we want to see versus just what we oppose. Same strategic levers, same kinds of boycotts, same kinds of disruptions, same kinds of interventions, same kind of street actions. But here what you have is we're invoking our heart, our courage, our soul, our spirituality, the world we want to see. So I really wanted to address that question of strategy that was brought up by saying they're not separate, right? So you can think strategically about how you're going to withdraw support from the old system and put it in the new system at the same time that you're thinking the best way to get a human being to change is to say, let's go on a journey together. And to frame what you're doing in a way that is working towards reconciliation. And the civil rights movement, Dr. King really got this. I want to just invoke that lineage. Gandhi really actually got this very strongly. And I think a lot of our movements are not seeing that as much as they could. Climate justice is starting to do that with the just transitions because they realize we can't succeed on climate justice until we go to the oil field workers and say, we're going to make jobs for you. They were forced to move towards reconciliation process because they were blocked strategically. We're smarter than that. We're savvier than that. We're in fellowship of reconciliation. We're way ahead of the game here. We understand that we can think about this strategically ahead of time. Find ways to make a movement built on reconciliation so that what is there to fight against? Don't you want to come and live, share, grow? Okay. So, I want to just take a deep breath. Actually, I get really fired up doing things. We're really going to launch this movement. We're really going to go ask Bill Gates to give back all his money. We're really serious about this really crazy idea. I'm really going to go to my mom after this weekend and say, come join my movement. I'm going to start with my mom. Yeah, it's true. I actually started with you. It's a deep honor to actually get to provide the Fellowship of Reconciliation to live, share, grow. And here's my timeline. This is a little audacious. Just get ready.
Boy, are we surprised.
Today until November, because this thing is happening in November. It's a little distracting. We're building this movement, right? There's a lot of work that goes into strategic planning, to building even the website. You can actually go to the website. I'm very proud of myself, but lots of things don't work right yet. If you'd like to help with that, you're really welcome. So connecting, resourcing, building alliances, initiating. Oops, sorry. The next phase through the winter is inviting people, issuing this bold invitation in creative and strategic ways, everywhere that we can. I want to go to the Chamber of Commerce, and invite them to live, share, grow. I want to go to my poor relatives and my wealthy relatives and invite them to live, share, grow. I want to go to all these unlikely groups. Now, I told you in the write-up of this I was going to make a historical reference, and I mentioned Gandhi and King, but I want to mention Vinoba Bhave, who was this crazy Indian dude after Gandhi. He was a disciple of Gandhi's, more or less, who decided, the poor Indians don't have any land because the British took it all, and now the wealthy Indian elites have it. Why don't I just go and ask them, in the spirit of Gandhi, to give back the land? And he was actually remarkably successful at doing this. They had a lot of bureaucratic problems about dispersing land, I'll just say that. But this guy, Vinova Bave, we call it the Vinova Bave ask. Like literally, let's go to each other and ask ourselves to change this, to take back that $5 from the Walton family and give it to you, right? We can do that. Every single one of us actually could probably do that. If it was not $5 and $1. Today, we can give it to somebody in this room. So to issue the bold invitation, in spring, when the dandelions bloom, because it's kind of my theme, we want to launch some major campaigns around shaking up society, using acts of purpose and persuasion, encouraging non-cooperation, continuing to issue the bold invitation, challenging some of those pillars of support, and to really start to work on this issue in really bold, big ways. Spring is a great time to do it. There's no snow anymore. When you're strategically planning, you think about things like snow. Peace Corps is escalating. So it's next summer. I want to be escalating this movement. I want to see how many places we can shake up the way we're doing business as usual and changing it into these viable alternative structures. Remember, that's the real strategic key here for this issue, is that we aren't reinventing wheels. People are already out there doing that. We are getting people to leave the old system and participate in the new system. And that's what makes this possible right now. I told you this was a pretty audacious timeline, but I didn't tell you why I care so much. By this time next year, on the Met Fellowship Reconciliation in 2017, 840,000 people, American citizens, will have already died of this issue. If those were tanks instead of an economic system coming down into our communities and running over the children, you can be sure I'd be massively mobilizing against that. If this was a war, as the class war literally is, it's killing us one every 36 seconds, wouldn't you be organizing a civil resistance campaign to deal with it? Wouldn't you be boldly doing this totally crazy thing that nobody thinks will work, just in case it might work? Just in case you could get $5, $500,000, $5 million, $5 billion, $5 trillion to move from where it is now in such destruction and injustice. And I haven't even talked about the worst of injustice. It's heartbreaking what's happening to our people. We like to say low-income communities, but it's our people. It's our families, our human beings. I would do something about that. And I invite you to do something with me. And that, for me, is leadership. Thank you.